Welcome to my cherry guide for UFO 50's divers. The cherry requirement is to beat the game with 3 emblems which you'll find hidden around the map. First things first, I'm going to show you the path to the 3 emblems, since if you have already beaten divers, that is all you need. Then I'll go over some of the mechanics of the game before getting into the run itself, where I show you the full route I take. The closest emblem is the Barbuta emblem, which you can find by following this path here. Next is the Mooncat emblem, which is on the left side. And finally, we have the third emblem, which is bottom right and only accessible after beating the Guelap. To start with, let's go over the shop. It's the first thing you're faced with when you start the game, and it's immediately very confusing. First, let's talk about the currency. There is a standard gold currency which you get after each fight depending on the enemies killed. You can also get gold from some chests found across the map. There are also relics that are required to purchase certain items, typically the better ones. These have a chance of dropping from enemies, with certain enemies dropping certain relics. They also can be found in a few odd chests throughout the map as well. I don't collect many relics in my run, and get by mostly on items I find or items that don't require relics, but if you notice a relic drop from an enemy, then you know you can farm them to get more if needed. The main relics that you want to get incredible items are the A and B relics, which I'll be showing how to obtain in the run itself. You can see an item's relic cost by hovering over it in the store. It's worth noting that almost every item has a certain amount of uses, which functions sort of like power points in Pokemon, where they have a limited amount of uses per dive. This refreshes whenever you return to the surface though. There are 5 tabs in the store, 3 of which are associated with weapons. These 3 types of weapons are Spear, Hammer and Shield. I'll go over battling a bit more later, but in battles every weapon has the option to attack or defend. You may be able to guess, but some are better for defending while others don't offer much in that regard. To start with, the Spear weapons. These are the best weapons for damage in the game, and in terms of brute forcing your way through, you can't go wrong with these. Possibly most crucially, they have lots of uses each dive, which is practically required for the boss fights. Hammers are sort of a midpoint between spears and shields. I didn't make much use of these, since I found only having one member with a shield is all that's needed for defense. That said, there is a unique hammer you can find called the Parasite, which I do use since it does decent damage and heals the holder on hit. I could very easily be sleeping on this weapon type, but I like heavily committing to either damage or defense one way or another. Shields passively increase the defense of the holder and are also great for defending allies. For me, I give one of my party a shield in one slot and healing in the other. I then use them to defend anyone that's about to take a big hit, as usually they are telegraphed. Since these big attacks are telegraphed, I find it unnecessary to invest in more than one shield, although feel free to experiment with it since the defense bonus is nothing to scoff at. You may have noticed that each weapon has an element tied to it. Rather than try to decipher the elements, I'll simply refer to them as green, red and yellow. They function in a sort of rock paper scissors scenario where green is strong against red, red is strong against yellow and yellow is strong against green. For most enemies you can tell because at least a part of their body is coloured in one of these 3 colours. Sometimes it's hard to tell, or for example with the final boss it just isn't the case, with the red tentacles being weak to the red weapons. You can however find out what an enemy is weak to by hitting them. If an enemy is weak to that element, they will flash that element's colour when hit by a weapon of that type. The next tab in the store is for healing items. They can be used to heal both in and out of combat, varying in strength and uses based on the healing item itself. I got by only using healing items I found in chests out in the world, although there is one healing item I'll buy late into the run once I can obtain it. It's worth noting that healing items are always a rough heal. For example, the small potion heals around 500 health, not 500 on the dot. And finally, the key items tab. You won't be able to get any of these at the start of the run, but they are very strong items. The bomb has only one use but does massive damage. It can one-shot most normal enemies. It can also be used to open up sections of the map, but in my run I only access one location with this, although I'm sure there are more spots to use it. The Mist Orb is purchasable after fighting the first major boss of the run, the Guelap. This item is incredible. It only has 3 uses but can be used to escape battles 100% of the time. It can also be used out of combat to make you invisible to enemies for a short time. You can see how long is left on the charge by looking at the bottom left. You can still get into combat even when hidden, just enemies won't target you. In some areas this is better than others as some enemies don't target you anyway and just move incredibly fast. That said, there are some areas where this item makes traversal completely trivial. The God Blood increases the holder's level by 1. I do make some use out of it in my run, however often the slot is better used on something else. Notably, this item doesn't require any relics to purchase, so it's easily purchasable in that regard. There are also other items not available for sale that you can find out in the world, which I'll go over when I find them in the run. Often, these unique items are very powerful. Make sure to equip items before you dive. You can do that in this middle option. Each party member can hold 2 items each. And to start a dive, choose the bottom option. Now that we've explained the menu screen, let's go over the exploration and combat a little bit. Often the best strategy is to avoid combat, and often you're able to dodge enemies by outmaneuvering them. Movement is quite floaty, but you should have enough control where you can kite enemies, especially once we get an item early on, which increases our move speed. That said, sometimes the enemies just dash into you and little can be done to avoid it. There are multiple switches around the map that will open shortcuts, so always keep an eye out for those. Whenever you find an item in a chest in the world, it takes the form of a pearl, and you only discover what's inside upon returning to the surface. Basically, if a chest has anything other than currency, it will come in the form of a pearl. This doesn't mean much, since you can't equip new items while diving anyway. There are loads of hidden chest locations, as well as the emblems we need to find for the cherry being hidden as well. Keep an eye out for discoloured walls that you may be able to pass through or bomb. Return to the surface to save any progress you make, as well as fully heal and revive any fallen party members. And now let's go over combat itself. As I mentioned before, each enemy is weak to a certain element. You can usually tell by the coloration on the enemy. As a reminder, green is strong against red, red is strong against yellow, and yellow is strong against green. Each weapon has the option to attack or defend, with spears being the best for attack, shields being the best for defense, and hammers being the middle ground. When a character is defended, any damage done to them is redirected to the defender. And if the defender has a shield, they'll take reduced damage from the attack as well. This also means sometimes you can prioritize defending over healing, since even if a party member is 1 HP, as long as they're being defended, they cannot be killed. The main issue with defense is that you usually can't tell which party member is going to be attacked. There are some enemies that attack every 2 turns however, and those enemies do telegraph their hits. These attacks do a lot more damage when they do hit. Make sure to keep an eye out on their non-attacking turn to see which character they look at, and then you'll know who to defend. I only ever have 1 shield in my party, and often use them only to defend the hard-hitting attacks, although you could always experiment with more shields since they do add passive defense to the holder as well. The only reason to defend with a spear weapon is to redirect the damage onto that character, but it won't reduce the damage taken. There are rare cases where it might be the correct play, but I never had this be the case. Any equipped healing items will obviously not have the option to attack or defend, they only have the option to heal a party member, which does what you expect it to do. And some items will not have any combat application. Notably the flippers, which is an item we'll acquire early, which only benefits us out of combat, and the mist orb can only be used to escape combat. They're both useful in their own right, but when you only have 6 item slots, you need to consider what you have equipped. You can also pass your turn or attempt to escape. It is rare that you want to pass your turn, but I do end up using this in the final fight. Since I put a shield and healing on one of my party members, I want to pass occasionally since they are both items with a low number of uses. I pass in order to save their uses for when I need them most. With spears and other attacking weapons, I cannot see much reason to pass your turn other than to save the uses for another fight. If you find yourself in a fight that you're not equipped or high enough level for, there's no harm in attempting to escape. Sometimes in a tough fight it will be your only option to potentially survive. If you have the mist orb equipped however, you can escape with 100% certainty, assuming it has charges left. So now let's get started on the run itself. First things first, we need to get some weapons from the store, although to be honest, I'll be avoiding combat on my first few dives. I decided to spend my starting money on 3 yellow sticks and a green lid. This is just my personal preference, since the first few enemies I'll be farming are weak to yellow attacks, but you should be able to use whatever you want. Make sure to equip your items and then we're ready to head out. To start with, we're going to get an item and open a shortcut. I'm not worried about getting into battles at this moment, so I'm attempting to avoid combat. We're loosely going to be heading down and to the left. If you follow my lead, you'll be fine. You can see I do a little loop here to avoid this combat, although sometimes combat is unavoidable. These anemone that shoot projectiles will do 200 damage to a random party member if they hit you, but they cannot drop them below 1 HP, so don't be too worried about getting hit by them, just avoid them if you can. At the end of this section is an opening on the left here. We go through it and head upwards. On our way up, we're looking for some different wall tiles on the right. We can pass through these slightly darker tiles here, which will lead us to our first chest and our first pearl. And now we go back and continue upwards until we reach a switch. We will flick this switch to open up a shortcut for later, and then our goal is simply to return to the surface with our loot, which will also save us opening the shortcut. Follow the path I do here to return to the surface. If you do get into combat, escaping is always an option, although there is a chance you won't be able to leave. If it's a fight with only 1 or 2 enemies, I would suggest just taking the fight, since you should be able to win, and also if you lose it's only a few minutes you have to replay. And in the pearl we get the Flipper's key item. Equipping this will increase your move speed quite dramatically, so make sure to equip it. And then we're diving again, but this time we're heading to the right. You can do this at any point, but I like to do it early on since we can get a really good weapon and also get one of the emblems required for the cherry out of the way. The reason we got the flippers before going here is because it will allow us to avoid fights more easily. I tend to the top here to avoid the piranhas that will spawn from the section below. Generally, spawning the top ones are easier to avoid. Then we have some more discoloured tiles that we can head through which will lead us to another area. If you do get into combat, either reset or attempt to escape. These piranhas are too strong for us to take out at the moment. In this area we have some more anemone, but they are the only threat, so really don't be too worried. I end up getting hit 4 times total, all of which are taken by Orlok, which isn't a bad thing, since he can't go below 1 HP from this as I mentioned before. You can follow the exact path I take, but this section is quite linear, although it does have a few short dead ends. We have a small passageway here with some hidden blocks which will lead us to our first emblem. There are plenty of invisible walls, but just wiggle around until you find the path through. And then continue to the end of this section to get a pearl from this chest. Then we attempt to return to the surface by going back where we came. As I mentioned, the anemone attacks cannot kill a party member. Here it hits Orlok again, but doesn't do any damage since he's already at 1 HP. As before, these piranhas are the most dangerous part of this dive. Even tending to the top they can get into a battle with you. If they do, make sure to attempt to escape. Even if you can't and you get a game over here, it's only a few minutes lost per attempt. I get into a smaller battle near the end here. Since it's just the one enemy, I decide it's easy enough for me to win. I use the lid to defend Orlok the first few turns, and then once I think the enemy is low, I just go all in with attacks. I get lucky from this fight as well and get a relic. And for returning to the surface we get the parasite weapon. This is a green hammer that does decent damage and also heals the attacker slightly when it hits. We also lock in the Barbuta emblem we found. Any emblems we find will appear in our inventory here. As you can see, we have the Barbuta emblem. Now we're going to head right one more time to loot a chest in the piranha section, as once we've got that there's no reason to return here. This is an optional dive though, the item is not required. By hugging the wall here, I can avoid the piranhas and reach the chest without issue. In the chest, we get a relic. After that, we're going to return to the surface to save. Again, if you get into any fight with the piranhas, just try to escape. Alternatively, you can come back here later on when you're stronger if you'd like. And now for our next dive, we're going to finally head to the left and use the shortcut we opened earlier. In this new area, I tend to the bottom here to avoid a cloud that will spawn if you're close to the top. Then I go along this top path to find a chest with a pearl in it. Be careful of these spikes since they do a lot of damage if touched. My aim now is to return to the surface with the pearl. On my way, I get into a fight with a cloud. The reason I start with 3 yellow sticks is for these eel enemies here, since they're weak to yellow attacks. You should be able to deal with multiple eels with these weapons. In this fight, however, I also encounter a crab. These crab enemies in this area introduce a mechanic where the enemy will spend a turn looking at one of your party members. You can then use the next turn to defend that member, which is particularly useful if you have someone with a shield. I use Time's shield to defend Orlok on multiple occasions before time is taken out. For our trouble, we get another relic, but with time dead and the others close to it, I'm just beelining for the surface from this point. And on making it back to the surface, we get a small potion from the pearl. I'm going to give this to Time. A small potion will be able to heal a party member by roughly 500 hit points and has 4 uses each dive. It's very useful to have one diver with a healing item equipped at all times. You can also use the healing items out of combat. Note that with healing items, you cannot heal dead party members, but it will still consume its use even though it will have no effect. Our goal now is to continue through the left section here. In this dive, we're going to open a chest with 500 coins, get our second emblem, and open up another shortcut. Here we're introduced to currents, which will push you slightly. You can fight them, however, and with the flippers, you should be able to avoid enemies even in the currents. Just be mindful of getting pushed into spikes. With the flippers, you should be able to avoid the clouds somewhat. You'll see me occasionally take slight detours to kite them. So here we have the chest with 500 coins. And now I get into a fight. Another eel and a crab. Again, I make sure to keep an eye out on who the crab looks at to know who to defend. And also, since the crab only attacks every other turn, I can use the turn it's not attacking to heal if needed. And up here we have our second emblem, the Mooncat emblem. I also choose to heal time here as well, although I should have done this straight after the fight. And now just follow me through to the end of this section. Now we're going to stay near the top until we reach another switch. If you're the same level as me and get into combat here, make sure to try to escape rather than fight. This switch opens the way back to the first area, so it's time to return to the surface and save our progress. Now we're going to return to the area we opened to loot a chest. We could have done this on the last dive, but I chose not to since it risked losing all the progress we made. Follow the path I take here to find a chest with a pearl in it. You can see me use the wall here to wait out the enemies since I want to avoid these fights. And now our goal is to return to the surface with our loot, a very short dive. From that pearl, we get a red lance, which we'll give to Dylan. And now we're going to grind a bit. I've reached level 3 from the few fights I've gotten into, but my goal is to reach level 7. To get to level 6, I'm going to head to the left section and fight those enemies there. You can do this earlier if you'd like since we've had access to this area from the start, but I've waited until now since with these better weapons it's easier to farm. And here are my earnings from the first bit of farming. Although obviously since the enemies drop different things, yours will look different. We're going to be fighting a boss enemy soon, feel free to buy new weapons if you can, but since everyone will have different loot, I'm going to go in with the weapons I've found. Green weapons are very good for the boss, so consider getting a green lance if you are struggling. I will buy the Godblood to give to Orlok since he already has a weapon equipped. This will increase his level by 1. Alternatively, if you have the relic, you can buy the bomb, which does massive damage but only has one use. Since the Godblood doesn't require a relic, I will only be buying that one for now. Even though item-wise I'm prepared for the boss, I still want to level up at least one more time, but you can level up more if you'd like. For this level, I'll go to the new section, since those enemies will give more experience. These mech enemies will each give 100 experience apiece. With a few more trips you should be able to get level 7. These mech enemies also drop the relic that's required for the bomb if you did want to get that. And here's my inventory after reaching level 7. Now I'm finally ready to face the boss. Again, you can get even better gear if you'd like. From the shortcut, follow the path I take to get to the boss. Avoid combat where you can since you want your weapons at full durability for the fight. And now for the boss, the Guelap. They appear with 2 anemone, and it has the ability to revive them. This can be a real pain since the anemone can heal, however I found leaving them alive sometimes they would waste their heals on one another. For this reason, I recommend focusing on the Guelap. It has a huge health bar and will take lots of turns to take out. If you have a bomb here, it will be good to deal a ton of damage. It also gets to move twice each turn, so can dish out massive damage, so be wary of that. My strategy is simple. Attack the Guelap with Dylan and Orlok, defend Dylan with time, except for turns where I need to use time to heal someone. Even with this strategy, you could get unlucky and they could focus down one of the party, or overheal the Guelap, but with a few attempts, you should have it. If you're struggling though, you could always farm some more levels. And now with beating the boss, you'll likely be very weak like me, so be very cautious on the way back to not get into any fights. Thankfully, since the boss is defeated, there is an opening on the right we can take, which is an easier path back. For beating this boss, we get the A relic, which lets us purchase the Mist Orb, which is an incredible item. Make sure you equip it. The Mist Orb allows you to be undetectable by enemies for a short time, and also can be used in combat to escape 100% of the time. It does only have 3 uses however. If you haven't got the Barbuta emblem from the right yet, the Mist Orb makes traversing the Piranha section and the anemone trivial. The reason I did it at the start was for the parasite. Now we've defeated that boss, many paths have opened up to us. First dive, we're going to explore the left path since that has many useful items for us as well as being required to progress. The Mist Orb is incredibly useful. I'm going to save it for the new areas since it only has 3 uses. We can now pass through here since the boss is defeated, and then we're going to look out for any darker wall spots since we can pass through one nearby. Here it is, and it leads us to a pearl. We can take this back right now if we want to play it safe, but I'm going to go into the left section as well. I use my mist orb so that the enemies won't target me. These sea spider enemies will shoot projectiles at you if you don't have the mist orb active. Still, you should be wary of them jumping up periodically. You can see the remaining duration of the mist orb in the bottom left. I end up getting into a fight with this sea spider since it's in a very awkward spot. You can use a mist orb charge to escape if you get into fights, but I like fighting at least once here since the enemies give great XP and gold. Any combat without a spirit, I'm happy to fight. If you have two spirits in the same fight, you're likely never going to be able to win. They will just continue to revive each other until you're out of weapon uses. You'll see me wait around the jumping sea spiders for them to jump, since the only time they're telegraphed in their movement is when they're falling. They can keep jumping over and over again and can easily catch you out that way. Down here at the bottom is a chest that contains the B currency, which is used to buy a very useful item. And just to the right of the chest is a switch that we need to trigger to progress further on. On our way back, we'll find a chest that contains 2,000 coins. There is a path to the left here, but I'm unaware of the room it leads to's purpose. If you know, please leave a comment. It's not required to beat the game or get the cherry. And here is the chest with 2,000 coins. It is also quite close to the exit, so we can head straight out after. And now to the surface to lock in our rewards. I used the B currency to buy the Holy Potion. This potion is a massive upgrade from the small potion we are using. It has 8 uses instead of 4 and also heals 2500 instead of just 500. Also, from the Pearl we got the Thorn Shield, which is great for defending and also returns some damage onto the attacker. Make sure to equip your new items. I give Time, the Thorn and the Holy Potion. Now we're going to head to the right. In this part, make sure to stick to the wall to avoid aggroing the piranhas on the right. For the section on the right, we will have a switch that we need to hit similar to the left section. Just before we reach the right section, at the center of this spiral is a chest containing a relic. We also have our final emblem by going through here. In the right section itself there isn't much for us. There is a chest in this area which contains a large potion, but with our holy potion there isn't much need for it. This section does have a switch like the left section that is required, so we're gonna go for that and then get out. I'm going to use my Mist Orb, but even with the Mist Orb you'll still have to watch out for these enemies here that follow a certain track. I try to wait for this enemy here, but this isn't a safe spot, so I get into a fight. I'll skip the fight, but feel free to use the Mist Orb if you'd like, otherwise take the fight if you can to get the XP. Down here is our switch, so now we're simply going to head out and back to the surface to save our progress. Potentially get into at least one fight before leaving to get some more experience. Feel free to spend some time farming. With the Holy Potion you should be able to last out here a while. We want to be a minimum of level 9 before the final dive, so any progress towards that saves you some time farming. Now the area to the final boss is open, but there is one more item we want to grab and a chest with some money in it as well. The chest we can only access if we have the bomb. If you don't have the relic required to get the bomb, I found that the mechs in the section that had the Guelap tend to drop them. Make sure to equip it. I replaced the flippers since I want to keep the mist orb. I want the mist orb since we will be traversing piranha infested waters. Now to the right again we have these piranhas. Use the mist orb to make traversal trivial. Then on this slightly discoloured section here we'll use our bomb to let us through. Then we're going to head into the final area briefly to get a new item. As soon as you enter this area there is this small space here with a hidden chest. Simply interact with it to get a pearl. And now we're going to return to the surface. You can farm some XP before returning if you'd like, but I decide to just do that all afterwards. And in that pearl we get the Holy Rod, an incredible weapon that can also heal allies instead of defend them. Since it's a spear, we wouldn't want to defend with it anyway. And now it's time to prepare for the final boss. I'm going to farm until level 9, you can do this in any of the new sections we've unlocked, whichever you'd prefer. I found the sea spiders on the left give plenty of XP. Different enemy types do drop different relics, so if you find an enemy with relics you're looking for, keep farming those. Good weapons to get are yellow and red tridents, although you could invest in some tower shields if you'd like as well, although I'm personally happy enough with only the Thorn. And here are my stats after finishing farming. I decided to buy a red trident primarily because it's what I can get. I would go yellow if I could, and I equip my divers as such. Dylan with the red trident and the mist orb, Orlok with the holy rod and a red lance, and Time with the Thorn and the holy potion. You can experiment with other weapons if you'd like, but both yellow and red weapons are good for the boss. I make sure to put the holy rod onto Orlok since sometimes the first hit is blocked, which you'll see in the battle, and we want the super effective attack to hit the target. And with that, we are ready for our final dive. If you want to farm any more you can, and make sure you have all 3 emblems for the cherry. I'll do my best to avoid any encounters until the final section, and I want to save my mist orb for then as well. On our way to the final fight, I'll use the mist orb only if I get into any encounters, since these squid enemies don't specifically go for you and can easily hit you even if you're hidden. I will make sure to save one charge for the final section though, as we'll want to be undetectable. When trying to avoid the squids, bear in mind their pattern of movement. Often I mistakenly would dodge into them where I could have just stayed almost still to avoid them. Since they move in a wave pattern, you can sometimes predict this to avoid them. That said, often they spawn in ways that you can't avoid them if you're caught in a current or just near that side of the map. This section is quite linear, but there are some dead ends that are dangerous to go down due to the sheer number of squid that appear. Obviously the flippers would help in a lot of the currents, but it's hard to have 2 non-combat spots for the final battle, one of which is already being taken up by the mist orb. Here I use a mist orb charge so that these worm enemies don't extend outwards towards me, making this area much easier to traverse. And here make sure to go left since there's a long dead end to the right. And now for the final fight. I focus on the eyes since they can heal other parts of the boss. The eyes are weak to yellow weapons and the tentacles are weak to red. The tentacles can defend the eyes, but usually I still find it worth focusing the eyes. Also the tentacles will only attack every other turn, which makes them easier to deal with, and their attacks are telegraphed. The eyes are weak to lightning, so this is where having the holy rod is useful. I put the red trident on Dylan, since if one of the tentacles block, they tend to only block the first hit, and the trident does less to the eyes than the holy rod, but actually does more damage to the tentacles. I have the red lance on Orlok, since once the eyes are dead I can start hitting with that instead of the holy rod. This also allows me to use the holy rod to heal if needed, since near the end of the fight I'll be running out of holy potion and Thorn uses. Sometimes I'll pass on Time's turn since I'm primarily using them for defense and healing. On turns in between the tentacles attacks I'm healing if needed, and on turns of the tentacle attacks I shield whoever is getting hit. Since there are 2 tentacles, sometimes it can be awkward if they choose different targets. Thankfully there's no need for Time to defend themselves, so it's only really an issue if they go for both Dylan and Orlok. Even in that rare case they can usually take the hit, but obviously it's risky if you get unlucky and they get focused down by other attacks as well. You can definitely come in higher level and with better gear, but I wanted to show it's possible with the gear you can find. Except for obviously the red trident I bought. The most frustrating part is reaching the boss without getting into fights, since the squid can be impossible to avoid. Still, that said, with the mist orb to escape 2 encounters and make it so that you can avoid the worms, it's definitely doable, Just like I say, it can be a bit frustrating. For me, it took me 5 attempts before getting the dive you see here, and only 2 attempts on the boss fight itself. The good thing about this game is if you die on the way or get a bad boss fight, you only have to replay a few minutes. And there you have it, the cherry for divers. It doesn't show in the corner since I already had it and didn't beat my previous time. Obviously you could get unlucky with the healing targets and also on missing attacks, but hopefully with these weapons you'll be equipped to take the boss out. You can always farm for a higher level for an easier time. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have any additional tips or know of any additional secrets, please leave a comment. See you in the next one.